Imagine waking up in 16th century Europe with a splitting headache or a bruised knee. Today, you would simply grab a mild painkiller from the cabinet or put some ice on it. But medical care back then was vastly different. If you visited your local apothecary complaining of your ailments, they wouldn't offer you a modern pill or even a standard herbal remedy. Instead, with complete seriousness and for a very high price, they would hand you a small vial filled with a mysterious, dark brown powder. They would instruct you to mix it into your morning tea or wine, promising it was a miraculous cure-all for absolutely everything, from stomach aches to internal bleeding. But this highly sought-after medicine wasn't made from rare exotic plants or ground-up minerals. It was something far more macabre. For over 500 years, the most educated and wealthy people in Europe were actively practicing medical cannibalism. They were grinding up 3,000-year-old Egyptian mummies and drinking them to stay healthy. How on earth did the Western world come to the conclusion that eating ancient corpses was a good idea? It all started with a massive, centuries-long translation error. Western scholars were studying ancient Arabic medical texts that highly praised a natural, sticky black substance called mumia. This was actually a type of mineral bitumen, or liquid asphalt, found oozing from specific mountains in Persia, and it was famous for sealing wounds and healing broken bones. However, when Europeans translated these texts into Latin, they got deeply confused. They noticed that Egyptian mummies were often covered in a dark, resinous coating that looked exactly like this medicinal tar. Instead of realizing they were looking at a preservative, they assumed the ancient bodies themselves were made of this magical healing substance. Just like that, a simple linguistic mix-up turned a rare geological mineral into a massive, multi-century craze for consuming human flesh. Once this misunderstanding took root, the demand for mumia absolutely skyrocketed, sparking one of the weirdest international trade networks in history. European merchants realized there was a massive fortune to be made, so they rushed to Egypt, pillaged ancient tombs, and shipped thousands of mummies back to Europe. This wasn't just a trend for the poor or uneducated. Consuming mummies was an elite luxury reserved for the wealthiest members of society. King Francis I of France supposedly carried a pouch of ground mummy mixed with rhubarb everywhere he went, just in case he got injured. Even King Charles II of England had a personal stash. He would collect the dust that fell off mummies and rub it onto his skin, believing it would transfer the ancient pharaoh's royal life force directly into his own body. Suddenly, an entire continent was obsessed with buying, selling, and consuming ancient Egyptian history. As the demand for mummy powder grew insatiable, a massive problem arose. Europe was running out of actual ancient Egyptians. Tombs were being emptied faster than ever, and a real mummy became incredibly rare and expensive. Seeing a golden business opportunity, unscrupulous merchants decided to fix the supply chain by faking the product. They began taking the bodies of recently deceased, executed criminals, beggars, or plague victims, stuffing them with cheap asphalt and drying them in the sun until they looked thousands of years old. These freshly manufactured pharaohs were then smuggled into Europe and sold to unsuspecting pharmacies. In fact, when a famous French physician visited Alexandria in 1564, a local dealer proudly showed him a warehouse filled with fake mummies, admitting they were all made from executed prisoners. This meant that the wealthy elites of Europe weren't even drinking ancient royalty. Most of the time, they were just drinking the ground-up remains of last week's local criminals. So, how exactly did one consume a pharaoh? Apothecaries didn't just hand patients a dry spoonful of human dust, they treated it like a gourmet ingredient. Mummy powder was regularly mixed into rich red wine to treat internal bruising, or stirred into warm water with honey to cure a nasty cough. For physical injuries, doctors would mix the ground-up flesh with beef, fat or wax to create a disgusting paste, which was then slathered directly onto open wounds, tumours and broken bones. Later on, when chocolate arrived in Europe, some wealthy nobles even mixed mummy dust into their hot cocoa, believing it was the ultimate luxury health boost. It didn't matter if you had a mild stomachache, a fractured skull, or a common cold. There was a specific mummy-infused recipe ready to be served at your local pharmacy. You might wonder if anyone ever stopped to think, hey, Is drinking a decomposing corpse actually good for my health? Surprisingly, a few brave doctors did speak up. A famous 16th century French surgeon named Ambroise Paré openly criticized the craze, warning that mummy medicine didn't cure patients, it actually made them violently ill. Because many of the mummies were freshly made fakes or contaminated with toxic asphalt, people who drank these concoctions suffered from horrific stomach cramps, terrible breath, and severe vomiting. Paré argued that the medicine was not only completely useless, but also deeply unethical. Yet, despite these warnings from the era's top medical minds, the mummy industry was simply too profitable to shut down. The public chose to ignore the grimy reality, continuing to swallow the rancid dust in hopes of a miracle. What is truly mind-blowing is that this wasn't just some shady underground street hustle. Consuming human remains was fully backed by the highest medical authorities of the time. By the 17th century, mummy powder was officially listed in prestigious medical textbooks and pharmacopoeias all across Europe, right alongside regular herbs and minerals. Doctors actually developed a strict grading system for human flesh, declaring that the highest quality, most potent medicine came from bodies that were completely dried, blackened, and emitted a sweet, resinous aroma. If a mummy didn't smell right or looked too fresh, it was deemed low-grade and less effective. Think about the irony. The period we now call the scientific revolution, an era defined by the birth of modern physics and logic, still actively encouraged people to check the quality, grade, and aroma of pulverized ancient corpses before stirring them into their morning tea. As the calendar turned to the 18th and 19th centuries, the medical craze finally began to die down. But Europe's bizarre obsession with mummies took an even crazier turn. Instead of swallowing them as medicine, high society Victorians decided to use them for pure entertainment. Wealthy elites would host exclusive, packed events known as mummy unwrapping parties right in their lavish living rooms. Guests would dress in their finest clothes, sip tea, and socialize, while the host slowly peeled back the ancient bandages of a plundered Egyptian corpse, eager to see what artifacts or shriveled body parts lay inside. It was considered the ultimate luxury social event of the season. And if that wasn't absurd enough, mummies that weren't unwrapped for fun were often ground up to create a popular oil paint pigment called mummy brown, used by famous artists, or were even burned as cheap fuel for steam trains. Ancient history had officially transformed from a pharmacy cure-all into a disposable parlor trick and an industrial resource, even as modern science rapidly advanced into the 20th century with the discovery of X-rays, vaccines, and the germ theory of disease. The ghost of medical cannibalism proved incredibly hard to shake. Believe it or not, genuine Egyptian mummy was still listed as an official, orderable product in the pharmaceutical catalogue of Merck, one of the world's largest medical companies, as late as the early 1900s. It took centuries for the medical community to look at a prescription for ground-up human beings and finally realize how utterly insane the practice was. The shift from viewing ancient Egyptian remains as a magical health potion to treating them as invaluable historical treasures was shockingly slow. It wasn't until archaeology truly modernized and sensational discoveries like King Tut's tomb captivated the globe in the 1920s that the world finally stopped trying to swallow ancient history and began trying to preserve it. Looking back, the era of mummy eating stands as a wild reminder of how easily human logic can completely derail when driven by superstition, bad translations, and commercial greed. For hundreds of years, some of history's most powerful rulers and brilliant minds genuinely believed that swallowing ancient, dried-up corpses was the ultimate secret to vitality and health. Today, we look at the quiet, preserved mummies in museums with a sense of deep respect and archaeological wonder, a massive contrast to the days when they were just another ingredient in a royal morning cocoa. So, the next time you wake up with a headache and complain about having to swallow a modern pill, just take a deep breath and remember, at least nobody is forcing you to wash down your breakfast with a spoonful of pulverized ancient royalty. Thanks for watching and stay curious.